Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something ancient, mysterious, and honestly, a little spooky: the fascinating world of Egyptian mummification. Picture this: you're in ancient Egypt, lying on a stone table, the desert heat brushing against your skin, and you're about to go through one of the most intense rituals in human history. But don't worry, it's not a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Just yet. Nope. You're being prepped for a long journey. You probably won't survive this process without some serious help. And we're talking serious help. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. Always curious where people are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright, back to you, the soon-to-be mummy. So, you've got your first big step ahead: mummification. It's no casual thing. Ancient Egyptians believed that death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of your journey into the afterlife. But if you thought all you had to do was lie down and relax, think again. Preparing your body for immortality was a complex, carefully crafted science that involved a lot of, well, let's call them uncomfortable procedures. This was not a one-size-fits-all situation, but rather an ancient ritual that took weeks, even months, to complete. Okay. It was all for the greater good, right? Let's start by understanding the whole reason behind it. Egyptians weren't just into preserving bodies for fun. They genuinely believed that for your soul to live on after death, your body had to stay intact. In fact, they considered it vital for the soul's eternal existence. They thought your soul would need its physical home, and if your body decayed beyond recognition, your soul would have nowhere to hang out. Which, let's be honest, would be a pretty rough way to spend eternity. Just imagine being locked out of your house forever. That's where mummification came in. Think of it as an ancient home improvement project for the afterlife, complete with a lot of sticky substances, body parts that are about to go on a journey of their own, and rituals that would make anyone flinch. But what was the first step in preparing for immortality? Well, if you were getting mummified, the very first thing you'd encounter would be the embalming process. Alright, here's where things get ... interesting. The first step in your transformation into an Egyptian mummy. You'd have to get your insides sorted out. Let's face it, you're not going to make it to the afterlife if your internal organs are still just flopping around, right? Nope. The Egyptians knew that they had to remove the organs to prevent decay and to protect your body for eternity. Now, imagine this. You're lying there, probably a little groggy, This is a serious process. So let's assume you're knocked out for a bit when the first thing to go is your stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines. They didn't mess around. But here's the kicker. The Egyptians didn't just toss your organs in the trash. Oh no, they had a plan. These were carefully preserved in special jars called canopic jars. Think of them as the ancient Egyptian version of Tupperware, except with more intricate design and a lot less plastic. The canopic jars were actually key to the process, because your organs were considered super important for your afterlife. After all, you'll need your stomach if you're going to feast on the food and drink waiting for you in the afterlife, right? And that brings us to the next step, the brain. Oh, you didn't think that was staying in, did you? The ancient Egyptians didn't really see the brain as important. They believed that the heart, not the brain, was where all your thoughts, emotions, and decisions came from. So, instead of carefully preserving your brain, The embalmers used a long hook to remove it through your nose. Nice, right? And then here's the weird part. They tossed it away. Yep, the brain was considered pretty much useless by the ancient Egyptians. The heart, on the other hand, was kept inside your chest, wrapped up in protective layers, and would be weighed against a feather in the afterlife to determine if you were worthy of immortality. Historians still argue whether the brain removal is more about preserving space for the soul, or simply a matter of practicality after all. They couldn't have a bunch of brains floating around, could they? But in any case, with the heart in place and the rest of your organs safely tucked away in their jars, it was time to get your body looking as good as new, or at least preserved for thousands of years. The next step, drying you out. Time to bring on the natron. Now that your vital organs are safely stashed in those cool canopic jars, and your brain is, well, gone, maybe you don't miss it too much. It's time for the next crucial step, dehydration. And no, this doesn't mean you'll be sipping on water to survive. The Egyptians knew that the key to preserving you for eternity was drying you out completely. The mummification process involved lots of natron. What's natron, you ask? It's a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and salt that acted as an ancient desiccant. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of those little silica gel packets you find in shoes. The Egyptians used natron to draw out all the moisture from your body. And they weren't just sprinkling it here and there, they'd actually pack your body with it, inside and out. They would cover you in a thick layer of natron for around 40 days. That's over a month of you being buried in salt and drying out like a raisin left out in the sun. Not exactly the spa treatment you were hoping for, right? But hey, they weren't messing around with preserving your body for the afterlife. It wasn't just the body that got the natron treatment, oh no. They'd make sure your internal cavities were scrubbed out with it too. It was an all-encompassing dry-out session to make sure that not a drop of moisture remained. Believed that the only way to preserve the body for eternity was to make sure it was as dry as a desert, and natron was the perfect tool to help with that. You can think of it like a massive, ancient, deep clean, except the result was more eternal, preservation, and less fresh and revitalized. But here's the thing. While the natron helped dry you out, it was also doing something else, preserving your skin and giving you that golden, it's almost bronzed look that we see in so many mummies today. It was part beauty treatment, part preservation. Technique. It's when you see those mummies with perfectly preserved skin, it's not just luck. It's centuries of ancient Egyptian know-how. Historians still debate whether the extensive use of natron was purely for preservation, or if it had a deeper symbolic meaning. Maybe the Egyptians thought the drying process purified the body and soul, too. Either way, once you're thoroughly dried out, the next step is all about putting you back together, quite literally. Alright, so now you're completely dried out, your organs are safely packed away in their jars, and your body is ready for the next big step, getting wrapped up tighter than a mummy burrito. But before they start wrapping you in linen, there's one more thing the ancient Egyptians needed to prepare your body's exterior for immortality. They weren't just going to slap some bandages on you and call it a day. Oh no, you've got to look the part of a deity in the afterlife. To kick things off, your body would be anointed with oils and resins. These weren't just any oils. They were meant to preserve your skin, giving it that lovely, shiny, almost waxy finish we associate with mummies. The oils also helped prevent the skin from cracking and drying out too much during the wrapping process. Imagine being slathered in an oil bath, But instead of coming out soft and smooth, you're now sealed for eternity. Not exactly the spa day you dreamed of, but hey, at least you'd smell good. Once the oils and resins were applied, they'd move on to the real wrapping part. It wasn't just a quick, careless bundle up. Mummification was a meticulous process. The embalmers would start wrapping your body with linen strips, making sure every inch of you was carefully covered. And this wasn't just a random act of wrapping, it was done with intention. Each wrap was believed to protect your body and, by extension, your soul. The Egyptians believed that every layer of linen you were wrapped in provided a layer of protection against evil spirits. So, you were wrapped and wrapped and wrapped some more around and around. Your body went until you were a mummy-shaped bundle of linen, but they didn't stop there. Oh no. After wrapping your body in linen, the would insert amulets and charms between the layers of bandages. These were little magical items designed to protect you on your journey to the afterlife and to ward off any pesky evil spirits who might want to interfere with your soul's quest for immortality. Some of these amulets were meant to protect your heart, which was already preserved inside you. Others were meant to safeguard your intestines, which, you remember, are safely tucked away in their canopic jars. Each item had a purpose, and each purpose was all about keeping you safe. For eternity, historians still debate. How much of the wrapping process was rooted in religious ritual versus practical preservation? Did the linens serve a more spiritual purpose, or were they just functional, ensuring that your body stayed intact for thousands of years? It's likely a bit of both. Either way, by the time they're done, you're no longer a person, you're a perfectly preserved body, ready to begin your journey into the afterlife. And with that, you're just about ready to be sealed away for eternity, but before they close your tomb, there's one more little thing you need: your tomb. You've got the oils, the resins, the amulets, and enough linen wraps to last for eternity. Now, it's time for the final step in your journey to immortality: the tomb. You're not going to just get buried in a random spot in the sand. Oh no, the Egyptians took their tombs seriously. You were headed to a sacred space that would be your eternal resting place. But here's the thing, getting a tomb ready for you was no small feat. It wasn't just about plopping your body inside and calling it a day. No, it was all about preparing you for the afterlife. And that meant setting up a proper home, one that would provide for you, keep you safe, and ensure that you wouldn't get lost along the way. Most ordinary Egyptians were buried in simple tombs. But if you were a pharaoh, priest, or high-ranking official, you were looking at something a lot more extravagant. Think pyramids. The tomb would be your final resting place, but it was also seen as a kind of gateway to the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that in order to travel to the next life, you had to be in the right place, with the right supplies, and a proper structure to guide you through the process. Once you were laid to rest in your tomb, the embalmers didn't just leave you there in peace. They sealed the tomb carefully to ensure no one could disturb your eternal slumber. But this wasn't just a case of stacking some stones over your burial site. The tomb would be decorated with images and inscriptions designed to help you navigate the afterlife. Picture this: your tomb walls covered with scenes of daily life, gods, and even maps of the afterlife. It was like an ancient guidebook, helping you figure out what you'd need to do to successfully reach the afterlife and become one with the gods. But there's more. The Egyptians believed you'd need all sorts of items for the journey ahead. This is where those canopic jars with your organs came in hand, along with the offerings of food, jewelry, and other items placed in your tomb. It was all about making sure you had everything you needed for the long trip, and that your body and soul would be well cared for in the afterlife. After all, the last thing you'd want is to reach the afterlife and realize you forgot your favorite snacks. Historians still argue over how much the tomb and its contents affected the spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians. Was the tomb merely a physical home for the body, or did it represent something deeper, like a connection to the divine? It's likely that both ideas were true after all when you're preparing for eternity. You want to make sure that you've covered all your bases. And so, with everything in place, you're ready. Ready for the final journey to the afterlife. But the mummification process wasn't done just yet. There was one more detail to take care of before your body could rest peacefully in your tomb. This was where the magic came in. So, your body is sealed in a tomb, packed with treasures. Your organs are neatly tucked into their special jars. And the walls of your final resting place are covered with images to guide your spirit through the afterlife. But there's still one thing the Egyptians weren't leaving to chance: the magical protection that would ensure you actually made it to the afterlife, without getting waylaid by evil spirits or nasty roadblocks. Enter the magic of amulets, spells, and other divine protections. The ancient Egyptians were serious about magic. They believed that the afterlife was full of challenges, dark forces, hungry gods, and even your own fear of being lost forever. That's why they didn't just leave you with a simple tomb and a bunch of organs in jars. They packed you with amulets, charms, and magical objects to make sure you could survive the perilous journey and avoid any pesky curses or pitfalls that might come your way. Some of these amulets were placed inside your wrappings, while others were tucked into your tomb itself. Either way, they weren't taking any chances. One particularly important item was the heart scarab. This little amulet was meant to protect your heart, which, remember, was thought to be the seat of your soul and your consciousness. The Egyptians believed that when you reached the afterlife, your heart would be weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavier than the feather, meaning you'd done wrong in life, you'd be devoured by Ammit, a terrifying beast that ate the souls of the unworthy. So, the heart scarab was meant to protect your heart and ensure it didn't betray you during the judgment. And then there were the spells. Yes, spells were just as important as physical objects in the mummification process. The Book of the Dead, a collection of funerary texts, was often placed in the tomb alongside the deceased. This book was full of spells designed to help you navigate the underworld, protect you from demons, and ensure that you would be able to enter the afterlife safely. Picture it like a spiritual instruction manual, a how-to guide for getting through the afterlife without getting stuck in limbo or being eaten by a giant crocodile. Historians still debate how the Egyptians viewed these amulets and spells. Were they just superstition, or did they genuinely believe that these magical items had the power to protect the deceased? It's likely that they saw them as necessary tools to help the deceased navigate a world that was as uncertain as it was dangerous. After all, the Egyptians were all about ensuring that you were well prepared for eternity, whether that meant physical preservation, magical protection, or both. But as you lie there, wrapped in your linen, surrounded by magic and offerings, there's one more important piece of the puzzle: your tomb. Yes, this final destination wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about making sure your soul would have a peaceful, protected home in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of another, far more complex journey. Now that you're sealed up tight, wrapped in linen, stuffed with magic amulets, and resting comfortably in your tomb with all your provisions. You might think your journey is over, but hold up. It's a whole afterlife waiting for you. And this is where things get really interesting. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the final chapter. It was the beginning of the real adventure. In fact, they believed the afterlife was the place to be. Forget the dreary existence of earthly life. In the afterlife, you were meant to live like a god, enjoying food, drink, and endless pleasure. But, as with anything in ancient Egypt, there were rules, and you had to prove you were worthy to join the gods in paradise. This was no VIP lounge. You had to navigate the underworld and undergo judgment. The first challenge you'd face after death was crossing the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Imagine this as a vast, dark, and dangerous place full of trials, gods, and mythical creatures. Think of it as a cosmic obstacle course. The journey to the afterlife wasn't just about staying dead. It was about reaching Aru, the field of reeds, which was basically Egypt's version of paradise. This was where you'd get to rest eternally, surrounded by the comforts of life on earth, but without the pesky business of actually living. But before you could enter this paradisiacal afterlife, you'd have to pass judgment. This was a big deal. Your heart, which had been preserved and protected by those nifty heart scarabs, would be weighed against the feather of Mat, the feather of truth and justice. This moment was crucial, as the gods would determine whether you lived a good life or if your heart was burdened by guilt, sins, or wrongdoings. If your heart was heavier than the feather, it was bad news. You'd be eaten by Ammit, the soul-eating monster, and your soul would be lost forever. But if you passed the test, you'd be granted eternal life in the field of reeds. Historians still argue about how much the Egyptians truly believed in these trials and judgment rituals. Were they just symbolic, or did the Egyptians think that every person had to go through this to enter the afterlife? The truth is likely a bit of both. These rituals were a way of ensuring that people lived righteous lives, but they also provided comfort and a sense of purpose when facing death. The idea of facing judgment and being able to prove your worth was central to the Egyptian worldview. But let's not get too caught up in judgment just yet. There's more to the afterlife than just passing tests. If you passed the judgment, you'd also get to enjoy a variety of delights. Imagine enjoying a lovely meal of endless fruits, meats, and fine wines. No need to worry about gaining weight or getting sick. You'd have everything you could possibly need for eternity. Sounds pretty sweet, right? So, while you may have spent weeks being mummified, embalmed, wrapped, and buried, this is just the beginning. The real journey is only just starting, and it's all about navigating the afterlife with the protection of magic, gods, and a good heart. All right, so you've passed the test. Your heart is lighter than the feather, and you've entered the field of reeds. Congratulations, you're now in the afterlife, living the good life, free from the burdens of earthly existence. But hold on, your mummification and the journey to immortality weren't just about floating around in paradise. Let's take a detour back to the earth, where it all started, and talk about one of the grandest tombs ever created, the pyramids. Because, believe it or not, those enormous structures were much more than just fancy burial sites. They were essential to your afterlife, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians. The pyramid wasn't merely a grand resting place. It was your gateway to the afterlife. Think of it as the most exclusive VIP lounge you could imagine. But instead of velvet ropes, you're looking at thousands of stone blocks. The pyramids were designed to help the soul of the deceased make the transition from this world to the next. Specifically, the Great Pyramid of Giza, where Pharaoh Khufu was entombed, was built with the perfect alignment to the stars, ensuring that the deceased could successfully ascend to the heavens. But here's the twist. Pyramids weren't just for the big shots. Sure, pharaohs and the super wealthy got their giant, awe-inspiring pyramids, but everyday Egyptians had their own form of these monumental tombs. These were usually smaller, more humble structures, but still carefully designed and oriented to help the soul reach the afterlife. Even if you weren't royalty, you were still expected to have a good pyramid-like structure, ensuring your passage to a idyllic afterlife. Interestingly, historians still debate whether the Egyptians truly saw the pyramid as a physical means of traveling to the afterlife, or if it was purely symbolic. Some scholars argue that the pyramid's shape represented the sun's rays, Dane as a celestial ladder that would carry the deceased soul up to the heavens. Others suggest the pyramid was more of a home base for the soul, a place where it could return to for rest and rejuvenation after its journey through the underworld. Either way, the pyramid played a critical role in the afterlife, just as much as mummification did. Now, here's where it gets a little quirky. If you were a royal mummy, you didn't just get a burial, you got an entire team to help you transition. Priests, workers, and even family members would perform rituals and offer prayers to ensure that your soul made it safely to the afterlife. They weren't just honoring the dead. They were actively helping them through the trials and challenges of the duat. So, in a way, these grand tombs were like an afterlife project, constantly maintained and protected to ensure the deceased soul was never in danger. The weird part, though, is that not all mummies made it to the afterlife without issues. As time passed, many of the tombs were looted, and royal mummies were taken from their resting places. Imagine being a royal mummy, fully prepared for an eternity of bliss, only to be disturbed by a bunch of tomb robbers seeking treasure. This disturbance didn't exactly scream peaceful rest, right? Historians still argue whether the tomb looting was more about greed or an effort to keep the mummy alive for as long as possible by performing the necessary rituals. Some believe the robbers took mummies because they thought they could benefit from the power and protection of the deceased. Others think the loot was purely about the gold and treasures that were buried with the dead. Either way, this definitely wasn't a peaceful way for a mummy to rest for eternity. But back in the day, tomb robbers were simply another part of the afterlife equation, making sure the rich and powerful didn't sleep too soundly. Alright, now that we've covered how mummies were prepared for the afterlife, the role of the pyramids, and the way tombs were built to protect the deceased, let's move on to something a little more modern: how we treat these mummies today. Sure, they were designed for immortality, but what happens when their eternal rest is disturbed by the curious minds of modern archaeologists, or, worse, tomb raiders? The mummy looting wasn't just a thing of ancient times. It's still happening today, though, with more sophisticated technology and more at stake than just a few shiny trinkets. The most famous example of modern-day mummy disturbance is the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter. The tomb was found nearly perfectly intact, with its treasures, amulets, and mummified remains, just waiting for exploration. Sounds like a dream, right? But here's the weird part. After the discovery, a number of people connected to the excavation died under mysterious circumstances. Some of them even believed they were cursed by the tomb's spirit enter, the infamous curse of the pharaohs. Did the mummies of ancient Egypt really have curses? Or was it just a string of bad luck? Historians and archaeologists still debate whether the idea of a mummy's curse has any basis in reality. Some argue that it was just a series of coincidences, a tragic case of people dying unexpectedly and fueling sensational rumors. Others claim the curse was a way to explain the rapid decline in health and fortune of those involved in the excavation. While the curse has been debunked, it's still fascinating to think about how the discovery of mummies stirred up both wonder and fear, even in modern times. But let's not get too carried away with supernatural stuff. In reality, the process of uncovering mummies has brought incredible insights into ancient Egypt. With modern technology, such as CT scans and DNA analysis, we've been able to learn a lot about the mummification process itself and the lives of the people who lived thousands of years ago. We now know more about how they mummified their dead, what materials they used, and even what they ate. For example, archaeologists recently discovered that the ancient Egyptians used some surprisingly modern techniques to preserve the body. They applied herbal treatments to the skin and used certain resins to protect the corpse from bacteria. They even figured out ways to mummify pets. Many tombs have been discovered with mummified cats, dogs, and even crocodiles. If you're going to take your best friend to the afterlife, you've got to make sure they're mummified, too. Interestingly, some scholars argue that the ancient Egyptians were so invested in the process of mummification because they truly believed in the power of preservation. They believed that by maintaining the integrity of the body, they could preserve the essence of the individual for eternity. But does this mean the Egyptians were just obsessed with immortality? Or was there a deeper spiritual connection, too? The idea of bodily preservation, historians still debate whether mummification was about religion, science, or both. And let's not forget that the mummification process wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about ensuring that the soul had a chance at immortality. The elaborate rituals, amulets, and burial goods were all aimed at guaranteeing the soul's safe passage into the afterlife. Even though some of those goods were looted or destroyed over the centuries, the central idea behind mummification, the quest for eternal life, remains at the heart of ancient Egyptian culture. Now, we've explored the fascinating practices behind mummification, the mystical allure of curses, and how modern science has unraveled many of the mysteries of ancient Egypt. But let's take a moment to think about what happened after the tombs were sealed and the mummies were laid to rest. Over the centuries, the tombs were not always as safe and secure as the Egyptians hoped they would be. In fact, some mummies had a seriously rocky start to their eternal slumber. You see, tomb robbing wasn't just a hobby, it was a serious problem. In ancient Egypt, tomb raiders, desperate for treasure and jewels, would sneak into burial sites and plunder them for anything of value. But here's the kicker. They didn't just steal gold and gems. Many times the mummies themselves were taken and sold, or worse, desecrated. This was particularly common in royal tombs, where mummified pharaohs were often stripped of their valuables. Imagine spending centuries perfectly preserved in your tomb, only to be yanked out, tossed around, and stripped of everything you were buried with. Not exactly a restful eternity now. Not get too upset for the mummies just yet. Despite this, many of them survived their tomb robberies quite well. Some were reburied in secret locations, and in a few cases, priests and families went to great lengths to protect them. But for others, the fate was less than kind. The idea of robbing tombs wasn't just a thing of the past. In the 19th century, there was a rush of interest in ancient Egypt, thanks to the discovery of royal tombs and the fascination with pharaohs. People began digging up ancient mummies and transporting them to museums across the world, where they were displayed for public consumption. While this may have been exciting for archaeologists and museum goers, it was another unwelcome disturbance for the mummies. But here's the twist. Some of these mummies weren't just of the royal variety. While it's easy to imagine that, only pharaohs and important figures got the whole mummification treatment. Everyday Egyptians were also mummified. These weren't just the rich and powerful. Many people in ancient Egypt believed that mummification was necessary for everyone, regardless of social class. As a result, large numbers of everyday mummies were uncovered by archaeologists, and many of them were, frankly, pretty well preserved. Some of these mummies, known as middle-class mummies, were buried with personal items like jewelry, food, and even pets, showing just how much the afterlife was a concern for all Egyptians, not just the elite. Interestingly, historians still argue about the extent to which mummification was democratized in ancient Egypt. Were mummified everyday Egyptians just trying to ensure their afterlife was secure? Or were they seeking immortality for a deeper spiritual reason? Some scholars believe that even the poorest Egyptians went through the mummification process because they wanted to join the gods in the afterlife and gain access to the same eternal life enjoyed by the pharaohs. Others believe that the widespread practice was simply a matter of tradition, with no deeper philosophical meaning behind it. While the notion of everyday people being mummified may seem like an odd thing to us today, in ancient Egypt, it was just another step in preparing for an eternity of peace and comfort. It wasn't just about preserving the body, it was about ensuring the soul was prepared for whatever challenges the afterlife might throw at it. So far, we've seen how the mummification process was a meticulous, sometimes bizarre ritual that Egyptians believed would secure them a peaceful existence after death. We've also discussed how mummies were not always safe from thieves, and how modern-day discoveries have sometimes disturbed their eternal rest. But now, let's focus on something a bit more curious: how mummies, both royal and common, have impacted modern science. Yes, these ancient bodies aren't just relics. They're like time capsules that scientists have carefully cracked open to learn more about the lives of people who lived thousands of years ago. One of the most intriguing aspects of studying mummies is how they've allowed researchers to learn more about ancient Egyptian society, diet, and even health, thanks to advances in medical technology. Archaeologists and scientists have been able to use CT scans, X-rays, and other non-invasive techniques to study mummies without unwrapping them. In fact, these high-tech tools have provided so much information about ancient Egyptians that we can now uncover details we never thought possible. For example, we now know that the ancient Egyptians were dealing with a variety of health issues, some of which are still relevant today. Take atherosclerosis, a condition where plaque builds up in the arteries. You'd be surprised to learn that this was actually common among Egyptians, even though they didn't have our modern junk food. Researchers have found evidence of this condition in the mummified remains of several royals and nobility, suggesting that ancient Egyptians, too, had a tendency toward heart disease, just like us today. It turns out it wasn't just about their diet, but possibly also about genetics and lifestyle factors. Another fascinating discovery has to do with the ancient Egyptians' medical knowledge. They were surprisingly skilled when it came to healing and surgery. Mummies have been found with signs of surgery-like trepanation, where a hole is drilled into the skulls, suggesting that Egyptians had a fairly advanced understanding of anatomy and medical practices. The idea that ancient Egyptians were performing operations, even on the brain, shows how much they valued both life and death. They wanted to ensure their bodies were well maintained while alive, and they also took great care to make sure their remains were preserved in the best way possible after death. But here's something that might make you rethink the whole preservation for a mortality idea. Evidence of bad mummification techniques. Not every mummy was created equal. In fact, there are some mummies that were poorly preserved, and in some cases, it's clear that embalmers cut corners. Archaeologists have found mummies where the organs weren't properly removed, or the body wasn't adequately dried. In these cases, the preservation wasn't as effective, leading to a faster decay of the body and a less than ideal journey to the afterlife. So much for eternal life, right? This leads historians to believe that mummification wasn't always a flawless practice, and sometimes it was more about tradition than science. Historians and scientists still argue over the reasons behind these inconsistencies. Was it a lack of skill, or just a cost-cutting measure for less wealthy individuals? Could it have been a spiritual thing, where the soul was still believed to be capable of making it to the afterlife, even if the body wasn't perfect? Either way, the condition of a mummy tells us just as much about the person's life, and death has their treasures and burial goods. But let's not forget the most fascinating thing about these mummies. They're giving us glimpses into the past that we could never have imagined. Thanks to their preservation, we can learn about everything from their clothing and personal items to the diseases they had, and even the way they lived their daily lives. Mummies aren't just bodies, they're windows into a world long gone. And they allow us to better understand not only ancient Egyptian culture, but also humanity's collective history. By now, we've explored the incredible ways mummies have been preserved, analyzed, and looted over the centuries. But there's one thing we haven't touched on just yet: the ethics of displaying mummies in museums and how this affects the way we view them today. Think about it. How comfortable are you with the idea of having a mummy on display for public viewing? Museums all over the world have collected mummies, and while some see it as a way to preserve ancient history and educate the public, others argue that it's deeply disrespectful to the deceased. The ethical debate surrounding mummies is an interesting one. For centuries, mummies have been displayed in museums as part of the fascination with ancient Egypt. But some have questioned whether it's right to put a preserved body on show, even if it's been dead for thousands of years. For many, mummies are more than just historical artifacts. They are sacred remains of individuals who were once alive, cursed with their own beliefs, customs, and hopes for the afterlife. It's one thing to dig up a tomb to learn about the past, but is it acceptable to put those remains on public display as if they were just objects in a museum collection? One of the most well-known instances of mummy display occurred in the 19th century, when mummies were often exhibited in mummy unwrapping events. These were public spectacles where the mummies were unwrapped in front of an audience, much like a performance. While this may seem bizarre by today's standards, it was seen as a curiosity during the time. People would pay to watch, and the process was often viewed with a mix of awe and grotesque fascination. It was a way of revealing the past, but it was also an objectification of the dead, a sort of morbid entertainment. Even today, we're still grappling with these questions. Some museums have taken steps to address these concerns, opting to display mummies in ways that acknowledge the spiritual and cultural significance of their preservation. For example, some museums now include detailed explanations of the mummification process, the burial practices of ancient Egyptians, and the cultural beliefs behind it all. This way, the display is not just about the mummy as an object, but as a part of a larger story, a story about life, death, and what happens in between. There's also the growing movement of repatriation, where countries like Egypt are calling for the return of mummies and other artifacts that were taken during colonial times. They argue that these items belong in their rightful place, where the culture surrounding them can be fully understood. In recent years, we've seen a number of museums return mummies and other ancient artifacts to Egypt, acknowledging that the cultural significance of these items goes beyond simple historical interest. Instead of displaying them for curiosity's sake, many believe that these mummies deserve a respectful and meaningful resting place. Historians still debate whether mummies should be displayed at all, with some arguing that it's a form of cultural appropriation, while others feel that the educational value justifies it. It's clear that the mummies of ancient Egypt hold incredible historical and scientific value. But as we continue to study them, we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we stop treating them as objects of curiosity and start respecting them as individuals? The question of ethical display is something museums, scholars, Ks, and visitors alike will continue to grapple with. And while we're reflecting on this, let's not forget that the Egyptians themselves thought of mummification as a deeply sacred practice. It was a way of ensuring their loved ones could rest peacefully and transition to the afterlife with dignity. The tomb, the offerings, and the careful rituals around the process were all part of honoring the dead. When we visit these mummies in museums, are we continuing that reverence, or are we turning them into relics for entertainment? That's a question we may never fully answer. But it's certainly one worth thinking about as we look at these fascinating, preserved figures from an ancient world. Now that we've delved into the ethics of mummy display and the debates surrounding their treatment, let's talk about something truly fascinating: the modern science behind reawakening mummies. Thanks to advancements in technology, archaeologists and scientists are no longer simply unwrapping mummies and studying them as static objects. They're actively bringing them back to life in a way. Okay, no, we're not talking about bringing them back to life in the zombie sense. But the methods we have today for analyzing mummies are allowing us to peer into their past in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. One of the most groundbreaking technologies used to study mummies is CT scanning, or computed tomography. In the past, if scientists wanted to understand the internal structure of a mummy, they had to physically unwrap it or perform invasive surgery to see what was inside. But thanks to CT scans, they can now peer inside the mummy's wrappings without ever disturbing the body. This technology uses X-rays to create detailed images of the body's internal structure, allowing scientists to see everything from bones to soft tissue, all in a non-invasive way. Think of it as a superpower that lets us examine the inside of an ancient body without touching it. These scans have revealed some amazing details about mummified individuals, such as the condition of their bones, the health problems they suffered from, and even the food they ate. For example, by analyzing the teeth and bones of a mummy, scientists can determine the person's age, diet, and even what kinds of diseases they might have had. In some cases, CT scans have revealed signs of infections, arthritis, and even broken bones that were healed using early medical treatments. The scans have given us a clearer picture of the lives of ancient Egyptians, what they ate, how they lived, and even how they died, in some cases. CT scans have even allowed scientists to discover mummified fetuses or children that had been buried with their parents, shedding light on family dynamics and the mortality rate in ancient Egypt. By studying the way bodies were preserved at different stages of life, scientists are able to form a more complete picture of how mummification practices evolved over time and across different classes. But that's not all. Scientists have also started using DNA analysis to unlock the genetic secrets of mummies. In one famous case, scientists extracted DNA from the mummies of the pharaohs, revealing genetic information about their family lineages. These genetic studies have uncovered fascinating details about royal bloodlines, showing how closely related some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs were. They've also helped us understand the spread of diseases like malaria, which may have played a role in the deaths of some Egyptian rulers. In fact, the presence of malaria in ancient Egypt is a hotly debated topic. Still aren't entirely sure whether the disease was a significant factor in the ancient world, or if it's just a recent discovery in the mummy's DNA. Historians and scientists continue to debate the results of DNA studies. Some argue that the genetic evidence supports a much clearer understanding of Egyptian royal families and their health issues, while others believe it raises more questions than it answers. In any case, DNA analysis is providing a deeper insight into the genetic history of ancient Egypt, giving us a better understanding of who these people were beyond their preserved bodies. As cool as it is to learn about ancient Egypt through modern science, it's also a bit of a double-edged sword. The more we reawaken these mummies, the more we uncover about their lives and the more we might disturb their eternal peace. Sure, we're learning valuable lessons, but at what cost? It's a fascinating dilemma, and one that challenges our ideas about the sanctity of the dead versus the pursuit of knowledge. As we dig deeper into the modern science of mummies and the ways we've brought them back into the spotlight, we also have to acknowledge the fascinating ways in which ancient Egyptians themselves viewed death, immortality, and the afterlife. Mummification was a core aspect of their culture, but it wasn't just about preserving bodies. It was about ensuring the continuation of the soul. So, let's step back for a moment and look at the broader spiritual framework that underpinned all these elaborate practices for the ancient Egyptians. Death wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning of a much bigger adventure. They believed in an afterlife that was both a continuation of life on earth and a spiritual quest, full of challenges and rewards. At the heart of their beliefs was the concept of the Ka, the life force or spirit that every individual carried. With them, upon death, the Ka needed a place to rest and continue its existence, and that's where mummification came in. The preserved body acted as a vessel for the Ka, ensuring that it would have a home and could enjoy the comforts of the afterlife. But mummification wasn't just about making sure the body didn't rot away. The Ba, another part of the soul, was also crucial in the afterlife journey. While the Ka stayed with the body, the Ba was believed to be more mobile, could leave the tomb and travel freely. The Ba was often depicted as a bird with a human head, soaring through the heavens and the earth. After death, the Ba would visit the body in the tomb, and mummification helped ensure that the soul could find its way back to the body when needed. This duality of the Ka and Ba was part of the reason the Egyptians went to such great lengths to preserve the body. If the body was destroyed or decayed beyond recognition, the soul would not be able to reunite with it, which would prevent the person from achieving eternal peace. This belief system shaped their approach to death and the afterlife. Mummification wasn't a way to cheat death, but a way to ensure a peaceful and successful transition into the next life, beyond the preservation of the physical body. Egyptians also believed in a system of judgment in the afterlife. After passing through the underworld, the deceased would be brought before Osiris, the god of the dead, for judgment. The heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. If the heart was found to be pure and balanced, the person could enter the heavenly fields of Aru, where they would live in peace, free from suffering and full of abundance. But if the heart was heavier than the feather, it would be devoured by Ammit, the terrifying creature, with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This judgment was the final test to determine whether or not you would live forever in bliss or be lost forever. It's interesting to note that some historians still debate the extent to which ancient Egyptians truly believed in the afterlife. Were the elaborate burial practices purely for the benefit of the living, who wanted to ensure their loved ones had a safe passage? Or were the rituals deeply spiritual acts for the deceased, helping them reach their ultimate destination? Some believe that the emphasis on preservation, rituals, and offerings was as much about reassuring the living as it was about helping the dead. After all, people weren't just preparing for death, they were preparing for the afterlife, a place that required as much care and attention as life itself. As we examine the mummies that remain from ancient Egypt to Koya, we're not just looking at well-preserved corpses, we're looking at a culture deeply concerned with the continuity of life and the preservation of the soul. The mummification process, from the removal of organs to the careful wrapping of the body, was all part of a much larger spiritual journey. And it's this sense of purpose and belief that makes studying Egyptian mummies so fascinating, because they are not just ancient artifacts. They are the remains of a people whose worldview was profoundly shaped by a belief in life after death, and whose efforts to preserve that belief still echo through the centuries. When it comes to mummification, the Egyptians did some really unusual things, and one of the oddest was their decision to throw away the brain. Now, before you get squeamish, let's dig into the reasoning behind it. Today, we know the brain as the center of cognition, thought, and consciousness. But the ancient Egyptians, they weren't so sure about that. In ancient Egypt, the brain wasn't considered the seat of intelligence or thought. No, that honor went to the heart. The heart was seen as the most important organ. It was believed to be the source of both intellect and emotion. Think about it. When you feel something, joy, sadness, love, your heart races, right? Well, the Egyptians believed that was your heart doing all the heavy lifting. They figured, if you think with your heart, why bother with the brain? So when the time came to prepare your body for the afterlife, the brain didn't make the cut. The brain was removed during the embalming process using a long hook, which would be inserted through the nose to liquefy and extract it. The brain was discarded, often through the same nostril it was removed from. And while we'd call that rather, well, inefficient today, the Egyptians believed that preserving the heart was much more critical for your journey to the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the brain's dismissal was purely practical. Perhaps it was too difficult to preserve, or if the Egyptians genuinely didn't care much for it. Either way, this wasn't just about scientific ignorance. It was an integral part of their spiritual belief system. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the other side of life, the importance of beauty in ancient Egypt. If you think today's beauty standards are a lot of work, well, you haven't seen anything yet. The Egyptians had some pretty extreme methods of maintaining their appearance, and they took their beauty rituals seriously, even if it involved some bizarre treatments. For starters, both men and women took skincare very seriously. Egyptians were all about clear, glowing skin. But to achieve this, they used a mix of oils, perfumes, and salves. But they didn't just dab on a little moisturizer, oh no. They made sure to use ingredients like aloe vera, honey, and even animal fats. One of the more strange practices involved using crocodile dung. Yes, you read that, right? Crocodile dung was believed to have healing properties and was often used as a face mask or body treatment. Okay, I'll leave the details of that to your imagination. Then there were their iconic eyeliner looks. The Egyptians were known for their striking eye makeup, often applying thick lines of malachite, green, and coal black to both protect their eyes from the harsh desert sun and ward off evil spirits. These bold eye shapes weren't just about aesthetics. They also served as a form of spiritual protection. But the beauty treatments didn't stop at the face. There was an elaborate process for maintaining body hair, which, unsurprisingly, was often shaved off or removed in some form. Historians debate how far these beauty standards were a matter of self-care versus cultural symbolism. Was it about keeping up appearances, or was it deeply tied to their religious and spiritual beliefs? Either way, the ancient Egyptians weren't afraid to go all out for their beauty rituals. No quick fixes here. Asterisk now. On to one of the most famous myths surrounding mummies, the idea of the mummy's curse. You've probably heard stories about the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb. It's where those who disturbed the pharaoh's final resting place supposedly met untimely, often mysterious deaths. So, did the Egyptians really curse their tombs? Or was this just a clever myth to keep tomb robbers at bay? Let's get this straight now. The Egyptians didn't leave behind curses written in hieroglyphs. The curse legend really started gaining traction in the early 20th century when archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. After the tomb was opened, several people associated with the discovery died under unusual circumstances, including Lord Carnarvon, who funded the excavation. The press quickly sensationalized these deaths, linking them to a curse that had been placed on the tomb. But here's the kicker. Modern scientists and historians believe there's no curse. Instead, the cause of death can often be explained by natural causes, like infections due to bacteria in the tomb, or even the sheer stress and excitement of the discovery. Some also suggest that the curse narrative was a product of media exaggeration, capitalizing on the mystery and allure of ancient Egypt. Historians still debate whether the curse had any basis in Egyptian practices. Were there curses written on the walls of tombs to ward off grave robbers? Maybe. But it seems more likely that any curses were just a cultural superstition aimed at protecting the dead from the greed of the living. So, while the idea of a curse makes for a great story, it doesn't quite hold up under scientific scrutiny. Asterisk, now that we've gotten a taste of the rituals and beliefs surrounding death, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the Egyptian afterlife. This wasn't just some vague idea of going to heaven. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was a well-organized spiritual journey that was taken very seriously. It wasn't just about surviving death. It was about thriving in a new world. One that mirrored the life they had lived, but with a twist. In the afterlife, your soul would embark on a journey to the Duat, the underworld, which was full of challenges and trials. But the goal wasn't to stay in the Duat. Forever it was to pass through it and reach the fields of reeds, which were essentially the Egyptian version of paradise. This was a land of abundance, where everything you had on earth would be restored, from food to drink to your loved ones. Think of it as an eternal vacation, but one that required some serious spiritual preparation. To make this journey successfully, you had to prove your worth. You didn't just walk into the afterlife unscathed. You had to undergo a judgment process. where your heart was weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If you had lived a righteous life, your heart would be light, and you'd be granted eternal peace. If not, you'd be devoured by Ammit, the soul-eating beast. Historians still argue about how much the Egyptians truly believed in the afterlife, versus how much of it was a cultural practice to encourage good behavior in life. Whether it was a literal belief or a moral system, though, there's no doubt that the afterlife was the central focus of Egyptian spirituality, guiding their rituals, burial practices, and entire worldview. Asterisk, you may think of the Great Pyramids as grand, iconic structures built to honor pharaohs, but they served a far more practical purpose than that. They were central to the entire mummification process. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were actually designed to function as spiritual factories for the dead, where bodies would undergo the necessary transformations for the afterlife. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example. While it is most famous for being the final resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, the pyramid also housed the workers and priests who oversaw the mummification process. The pyramid itself was believed to be a sort of cosmic ladder, helping the soul ascend to the heavens. But beyond the grand image of the pyramid, there was also a more practical reason for its existence. It was a gigantic burial complex, designed to house and preserve the dead, especially those of the royal family. These mummy factories included everything from embalming chambers to burial vaults. It wasn't just about placing a body inside and hoping for the best. It was about creating a perfectly preserved vessel for the soul. The sheer size and intricacy of these tombs were a reflection of the importance of ensuring the deceased soul could move on to the afterlife unimpeded. The workers who labored to construct these tombs weren't just building a monument. They were helping to maintain the spiritual order of the cosmos. Historians still debate the real purpose of the pyramids and whether they were purely tombs, or if they served more as temples for the dead, places where the souls of the pharaohs could ascend. But one thing is certain: without the pyramids, the mummification process as we know it wouldn't have been possible. As we dig deeper into the modern science of mummies and the ways we've brought them back into the spotlight, we also have to acknowledge the fascinating ways in which ancient Egyptians themselves viewed death, immortality, and the afterlife. Mummification was a core aspect of their culture, but it wasn't just about preserving bodies. It was about ensuring the continuation of the soul. So, let's step back for a moment and look at the broader, spiritual framework that underpinned all these elaborate practices for the ancient Egyptians. Death wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning of a much bigger adventure. They believed in an afterlife that was both a continuation of life on earth and a spiritual quest, full of challenges and rewards. At the heart of their beliefs was the concept of the Ka, the life force or spirit that every individual carried. With them, upon death, the Ka needed a place to rest and continue its existence, and that's where mummification came in. The preserved body acted as a vessel for the Ka, ensuring that it would have a home and could enjoy the comforts of the afterlife. But mummification wasn't just about making sure the body didn't rot away. The Ba, another part of the soul, was also crucial in the afterlife journey. While the Ka stayed with the body, the Ba was believed to be more mobile, could leave the tomb and travel freely. The Ba was often depicted as a bird with a human head, soaring through the heavens and the earth. After death, the Ba would visit the body in the tomb, and mummification helped ensure that the soul could find its way back to the body when needed. This duality of the Ka and Ba was part of the reason the Egyptians went to such great lengths to preserve the body. If the body was destroyed or decayed beyond recognition, the soul would not be able to reunite with it, which would prevent the person from achieving eternal peace. This belief system shaped their approach to death and the afterlife. Mummification wasn't a way to cheat death, but a way to ensure a peaceful and successful transition into the next life, beyond the preservation of the physical body. Egyptians also believed in a system of judgment in the afterlife. After passing through the underworld, the deceased would be brought before Osiris, the god of the dead, for judgment. The heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. If the heart was found to be pure and balanced, the person could enter the heavenly fields of Aru, where they would live in peace, free from suffering and full of abundance. But if the heart was heavier than the feather, it would be devoured by Ammit, the terrifying creature, with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This judgment was the final test to determine whether or not you would live forever in bliss or be lost forever. It's interesting to note that some historians still debate the extent to which ancient Egyptians truly believed in the afterlife. Were the elaborate burial practices purely for the benefit of the living, who wanted to ensure their loved ones had a safe passage? Or were the rituals deeply spiritual acts for the deceased, helping them reach their ultimate destination? Some believe that the emphasis on preservation, rituals, and offerings was as much about reassuring the living as it was about helping the dead. After all, people weren't just preparing for death, they were preparing for the afterlife, a place that required as much care and attention as life itself. As we examine the mummies that remain from ancient Egypt to Koya, we're not just looking at well-preserved corpses, we're looking at a culture deeply concerned with the continuity of life and the preservation of the soul. The mummification process, from the removal of organs to the careful wrapping of the body, was all part of a much larger spiritual journey. And it's this sense of purpose and belief that makes studying Egyptian mummies so fascinating, because they are not just ancient artifacts. They are the remains of a people whose worldview was profoundly shaped by a belief in life after death, and whose efforts to preserve that belief still echo through the centuries. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little less talked about, but just as luxurious. The ancient Egyptians and their love for perfume. Yes, perfume. Imagine you've just returned from a long, exhausting day under the blazing Egyptian sun. The air is dry, the dust still lingers on your skin, and your body craves rest. But here's the thing, you're not just lying down to sleep. You're about to embark on a journey of relaxation that includes one of the oldest and most sacred traditions in human history, the art of scent. The ancient Egyptians were all about maintaining balance, both in their lives and in their spirits. And what better way to help your body and mind unwind than by surrounding yourself with the soothing aromas of oils, flowers, and resins? You probably won't survive this practice without a little relaxation of your own. But imagine how these scents would have transformed a typical Egyptian evening, especially when drifting off to sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments side. Love to know where you're listening from now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Perfume in ancient Egypt was far more than a luxury or something to wear to impress guests. For the Egyptians, scent was deeply intertwined with spirituality and ritual. It wasn't just about smelling nice, it was about connecting with the divine and promoting overall well-being. Imagine walking into a room filled with fragrant flowers, calming oils, and the quiet whispers of incense. To the Egyptians, perfume wasn't just for beauty or fashion, it was for the soul. And this spiritual connection to scent extended far beyond the daily routines. It was especially critical in moments of relaxation, and most importantly, during sleep. For the ancient Egyptians, sleep was considered a sacred act. It was a time of rejuvenation, not just for the body, but for the soul. The perfect sleep was believed to restore the person's spiritual and physical balance and to aid in their journey through the afterlife. And what better way to assist that process than by filling the air with the calming and divine fragrances of nature? Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians truly believed that scents had divine power, or whether they were simply symbolic of the higher spirit. Imagine you're strolling through the fragrant gardens of ancient Egypt, with the warm desert air carrying the sweet scent of flowers and spices. As you approach a perfumer's stall, the air grows thicker with the rich aroma of crushed herbs, resins, and oils. The ancient Egyptians were pioneers in the world of scent, and the birth of perfume as we know it was almost entirely their doing. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just for personal pleasure. It was deeply connected to the divine, the spiritual, and the magical. Perfume wasn't seen merely as a luxury for the wealthy. It had profound spiritual meaning. It was believed that every scent carried a certain power, one that could affect your emotions, your health, and even your fate. Imagine walking into a room with the delicate scent of frankincense filling the air. It wasn't just pleasing to the senses. It was thought to carry the very essence of the gods. To the Egyptians, scent was not just a tool for physical relaxation or beauty, it was an essential part of their spiritual world. In ancient Egypt, perfume was also a form of prayer. Incense and oils were used during religious ceremonies to honor the gods, and the right fragrance was thought to attract the gods' favor. So, when the Egyptians created their perfumes, they weren't just making a sweet-smelling product. They were crafting an offering to the divine. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians saw perfume as an actual form of spiritual communication, or if it was simply part of the rituals meant to enhance the sacred atmosphere. But what's clear is that they believed in the profound effect scents had on their relationship with the divine. In temples, priests would often burn incense to create an atmosphere of devotion, allowing them to connect with the gods. Thus, smoke would rise to the heavens, carrying their prayers and offerings with it. But perfume was also a private act, something used in daily life to promote both physical and mental well-being. After all, you wouldn't want to face a long day without the calming effects of a good, aromatic oil to keep you centered, right? Egyptians didn't just use perfume to relax, though. They used it to fortify themselves against illness, bad luck, or even bad dreams. The Egyptians believed that bad spirits could be repelled by certain scents, and they frequently used perfumes and oils to cleanse spaces, bodies, and even their minds. Picture yourself in an ancient Egyptian workshop, surrounded by jars of resins, oils, and crushed herbs. You can hear the soft clink of glass containers and the faint hum of the perfumer working with precision. In this small, aromatic space, the creation of perfume was a highly skilled craft. The Egyptians didn't just throw together a few ingredients. They carefully extracted and combined natural elements to create scents that were not only pleasant, but believed to have a deeper spiritual and physical purpose. The art of extracting perfumes started with gathering ingredients from both the natural world and the sacred realms. Flowers, such as jasmine, lotus, and lily, were among the most prized, filling the air with soft, sweet scents. But it wasn't just the fragrant petals of flowers that the Egyptians relied on. They used a wide range of materials from resins like frankincense and myrrh to oils from almonds and olives. Frankincense and myrrh were especially important, as they were considered sacred substances, often burned as incense in temples to honor the gods. To extract these precious oils and resins, Egyptians used a variety of methods. One of the most common methods was pressing, which involved crushing flowers or plants and extracting their oils. In fact, some perfumes were created through a process known as maceration, where flowers or herbs were soaked in oils to release their essence. However, one of the most intriguing methods involved distillation, a process that would later become well known in other cultures. The Egyptians used simple distillation techniques to draw out the essence of plant materials, especially flowers and herbs, which would then be mixed with oils to create the final perfume. This was no quick process. Each bottle of perfume was a product of patience and meticulous attention to detail. Historians still argue about how advanced these extraction methods were. Were the Egyptians pioneers in distillation, or did they only use basic techniques like pressing and maceration? Some scholars believe that they were indeed early innovators, using methods that would later be refined by other civilizations, such as the Greeks and Romans. Others suggest that the Egyptians primarily relied on the pressing and soaking methods, which, while effective, did not require the advanced distillation method. Now that we've explored how the Egyptians gathered their ingredients and began the process of extracting and blending their perfumes, let's talk about the most important part of the process: oil. Oils were not only the base for most Egyptian perfumes, but were also believed to be the carriers of divine properties. The Egyptians weren't content with just smelling good. They wanted their perfume to serve a higher purpose, to soothe the body, protect the soul, and even enhance their spiritual connection to the gods. Egyptian perfumes were almost always oil-based rather than alcohol-based as we use today. This wasn't just a matter of personal preference. Oils were considered to be more effective at trapping and holding the powerful scents of flowers, resins, and herbs. These oils had a rich, smooth texture, and they absorbed into the skin, allowing the fragrance to last much longer than alcohol-based perfumes, which tend to evaporate quickly. The use of oils also ensured that the perfumes could be massaged into the skin as part of the Egyptians' larger beauty rituals. After all, skin care and self-care were deeply integrated with religious and spiritual practices. So the act of applying perfume was as much about honoring the body as it was about soothing the mind. The most common oils used in Egyptian perfumes were derived from plants like olive oil, almond oil, and sesame oil. These oils were rich in vitamins and nutrients, making them excellent for moisturizing the skin, but they were also believed to have healing properties. It's no surprise that oils were often used as the foundation for other beauty treatments as well, including massages and skin treatments. For the Egyptians, these oils weren't just beautifying, they were nourishing and protective, keeping the skin healthy and the spirit at peace. But there was more to the oils than just their practical uses. Many Egyptians believed that oils, especially those infused with flowers and resins, held spiritual significance. The oils were thought to embody the essence of the plants they were made from, creating a direct link to the divine. For instance, frankincense oil was seen as a link to the gods themselves, often used in religious ceremonies to purify spaces and bring about protection. Similarly, myrrh oil was associated with healing and was often used in the embalming process, as it was thought to preserve the body for the afterlife. These oils weren't just luxuries, They were tools for divine communication, as the Egyptians perfected their oil-based perfumes. They understood the importance of blending different scents. Each scent had its own unique effects. Some were calming and relaxing, others were invigorating or uplifting. The sweet, delicate scent of lotus flowers could ease your mind and prepare you for sleep, while the rich, earthy aroma of cedar wood could help ground your thoughts and protect you from harmful. Now that we've explored the oils and their significance in Egyptian perfume making, let's take a look at how these fragrances were woven into the larger fabric of Egyptian beauty rituals, particularly before sleep. Sleep was considered an essential time for the body and soul to reset and rejuvenate, and the Egyptians believed that the right scents could aid in this process, helping them achieve the perfect balance between the physical and spiritual realms. The act of applying perfume wasn't just about looking or smelling good, it was a deeply ingrained ritual. The Egyptians used fragrance to prepare themselves for sleep, believing that the calming scents would not only help them relax, but also protect them during their slumber. Much like how we might unwind today with a warm bath or a favorite bedtime ritual, Egyptians found peace and relaxation through fragrance. Perfume would often be applied before bed, massaged gently into the skin, especially on areas like the wrists, neck, and temples. These areas were seen as gateways to the soul, so the Egyptians took care to anoint them with oils and perfumes to ensure a peaceful and restful sleep. The act of applying perfume could also be seen as a spiritual preparation, a way to align the body with the divine and ensure protection during the night. Some of the most common fragrances used for sleep included jasmine, lavender, and lotus, all of which were thought to have calming effects on the mind and body. But the Egyptians didn't just rely on perfumes to aid sleep. They had a whole host of other relaxing practices.
Cool.
Incense was burned to create an atmosphere of tranquility, and music, soft and calming, would play in the background to ease the mind into rest. The use of natural oils like almond oil and sesame oil would also be part of a soothing massage before bed, further helping to relax the body's muscles. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians saw sleep as simply a physical need or whether it held a deeper spiritual significance for them. Were they merely trying to ensure a restful body, or were they preparing their souls for the journey into the afterlife, a time when they believed the soul would leave the body? Some scholars believe that sleep was seen as a type of mini-death, a moment of rest where the soul could leave the body for a brief period, while others argue that sleep was viewed more as a necessary physical restoration. Either way, one thing is clear. The Egyptians considered sleep a sacred time that needed to be protected and enhanced with perfumes, oils, and rituals. Imagine now lying in an Egyptian bed, surrounded by the sweet scent of jasmine or lotus oil, drifting into a deep, peaceful sleep. The world outside is calm, and with each breath, the perfume of the ancient oils fills the air, soothing your mind and body. You're ready for a rejuvenating rest, one that will restore your spirit and prepare as you drift deeper into sleep, surrounded by the calming scents of ancient Egyptian perfumes. It's fascinating to consider how these fragrances were not just for private use. They had a divine purpose as well. Perfume wasn't just about feeling. Good fragrances were thought to connect the physical world with the spiritual. Perfumes were used in religious rituals to honor the gods, and they held immense power in sacred ceremonies. The Egyptians believed that every scent carried the essence of a god or goddess, transforming the atmosphere into something sacred, capable of attracting divine favor. One of the most prominent uses of perfume in Egypt was in religious offerings. The Egyptians understood that to truly honor the gods, they had to use the most precious and pleasing scents, which they believed would make their prayers and offerings more pleasing to the divine. Frankincense and myrrh were the goat scents. In these rituals, known for their sweet, rich aromas and their association with purity and protection, when burned in temples or placed on altars, the smoke was believed to carry prayers directly to the gods. But perfume was also deeply personal. In religious contexts, individuals would use fragrances in their homes or at their places of worship to create an atmosphere of devotion. Scents like cinnamon or cedarwood were believed to purify the air and ward off evil spirits. It was said that the Egyptians would sprinkle scented oils on statues of their gods, offering them not just food or incense, but the gift of fragrant oils to create a connection with the divine. These rituals were seen as essential for maintaining harmony with the gods, ensuring that they remained favorably disposed towards the living. Perfume wasn't limited to the private spaces or temples. It had a vital role in funerary practices. As well, in tombs and burial chambers, perfume was offered as a means to preserve the body for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the fragrance of the perfume could help the deceased journey safely to the next world. Certain scents, particularly myrrh, were associated with preservation and immortality, making them essential in mummification rituals. The body was anointed with oils and resins, ensuring that the soul would have a pleasant experience in the afterlife, and that it would be protected from the dangers of the duat. The underworld. Historians still debate whether perfume in religious rituals was truly a means to attract divine attention, or if it was more about creating a sacred atmosphere in which individuals could feel spiritually connected. Some scholars argue that the act of burning or wearing perfume was an offering to the gods in itself, while others suggest that the real purpose was to prepare the worshipper or the deceased for their spiritual journey. Either way, it's clear that fragrance was seen as a bridge between the earthly and the divine, helping Egyptians feel closer to their gods and reinforcing the sacredness of their practices. So, as you lie there in the imagined quiet of your bed, the scents of frankincense or lotus might seem far removed from. Now, as we explore the divine connection that perfumes had in ancient Egypt, let's take a step back and consider the use of scent in more personal, daily life. While perfume certainly had spiritual significance, it wasn't reserved just for religious rituals or burial practices. For the ancient Egyptians, scent was as integral to their everyday life as food or clothing, and they used it constantly, from personal hygiene to socializing. From ceremonial functions to leisure, imagine walking through a bustling Egyptian market. The air is thick with the fragrance of spices, flowers, and fresh oils. The Egyptians didn't just rely on perfumes for spiritual or practical purposes. They also used scent to elevate their social standing and reputation. In fact, the use of perfume was a major indicator of wealth and status. If you were a high-ranking official or a member of the royal court, you would have access to the finest oils and fragrances. And wearing perfume was a way to signify your position in society. Perfume was often worn as a sign of refinement and elegance, and it was as much a part of beauty rituals as makeup or hairstyles. The upper echelons of society would often indulge in extravagant fragrances, using them not only for personal hygiene, but as a way of asserting their elite status. This was especially true for the royals, like Cleopatra, who is famous for her use of intoxicating perfumes, sometimes infused with exotic ingredients such as rose, cinnamon, and myrrh. These scents weren't just about smelling good, they were a tool of seduction, power, and prestige. But it wasn't just the wealthy who used perfume. Even common Egyptians, though they might not have had access to the same exotic ingredients, would use simple but pleasant scents like cedarwood, cinnamon, and sandalwood to freshen up and maintain their appearance. Perfume was a part of their daily life, and it was just as essential for the middle and lower classes as it was for royalty. People would dab perfume on their skin, especially during social gatherings or after bathing, and it became a way of showing respect for oneself and others. Fragrance was seen as a way to show dignity and cleanliness. The Egyptians didn't just apply perfume on themselves. They also used it in their homes. The scent of flowers, oils, and incense would fill the air of their living spaces. The air itself would carry fragrances that helped set the mood, whether it was a time for rest, religious ceremony, or celebration. In fact, many homes had designated areas for burning incense, and the Egyptians were known to have a deep appreciation for the art of creating a pleasant atmosphere. Their understanding of how scents could affect moods and energy levels was far beyond what we might expect from an ancient civilization. Historians still argue whether perfume's role in daily life was mostly a reflection of social class or whether it had a deeper, universal importance in Egyptian culture. Was the use of scent an indicator of wealth and status? Or was it truly about creating a balanced spiritual? Now that we've explored how perfume played a role in both the spiritual and social aspects of Egyptian life, let's zoom in on the specific fragrances that were most beloved by the ancient Egyptians, some of which might even surprise you. These perfumes weren't just about pleasant smells. Each fragrance had a unique significance, believed to affect the mind, body, and soul in various ways. Imagine stepping into an ancient Egyptian palace or temple, where the air is filled with the sweet, smoky essence of myrrh or the delicate fragrance of jasmine. Each of these scents would have been carefully chosen not just for their beauty, but for their power to influence the spirit. One of the most iconic perfumes in ancient Egypt was frankincense. This resin, derived from the gum of trees found in the Arabian Peninsula and parts of Africa, was used extensively in religious rituals. Its deep, resinous fragrance was thought to carry the prayers of the people directly to the gods. In fact, frankincense was so sacred that it was reserved for ceremonial use in temples and palaces, used as an offering to the gods. When burned, it released a rich, smoky aroma that symbolized purity and divine presence. Frankincense was also used in burial rituals, often placed in tombs to help the soul navigate the afterlife. Further cementing its association with spiritual protection, myrrh was another important fragrance in Egyptian life. Like frankincense, myrrh was used in religious ceremonies, but it also had significant medicinal properties. The resin from the myrrh tree was used to treat wounds and ailments, and it was even employed in the mummification process. The rich, earthy scent of myrrh was believed to have purifying qualities and was often associated with the goddess Isis, who was connected to healing and protection. This powerful scent wasn't just for the divine, it was for the living as well, to protect them from harm and ensure their safety and health. But it wasn't all about heavy, earthy resins. The Egyptians also loved floral scents, with jasmine being one of the most prized flowers. Jasmine's delicate, sweet fragrance was used in perfumes meant to promote relaxation and serenity, perfect for winding down at the end of a long day. Jasmine was believed to have calming effects on the body, soothing the nerves and promoting restful sleep. Imagine preparing for sleep in an ancient Egyptian home. The night air filled with the sweet scent of jasmine. Nothing could be more peaceful. or inviting. Lotus flowers were also highly valued, particularly the blue lotus. This flower, which grew in Egypt's Nile River, was associated with rebirth and spiritual awakening. Its subtle fragrance was often used in perfumes and incense to enhance spiritual rituals and promote calmness. The blue lotus was symbolic of the sun, representing light, life, growth qualities that the Egyptians hoped to bring into their own lives through the use of such powerful fragrances. The flower scent, which was light and slightly sweet, would have been a perfect companion to evening rituals or sleep. Historians still debate the significance of certain fragrances in ancient Egyptian culture. Were scents primarily used for their medicinal or relaxing properties, or did they serve a more symbolic purpose, tied to the gods and the afterlife? Some scholars argue that each fragrance had a spiritual meaning, tied to specific deities or beliefs, while others suggest that the perfumes were more about creating a sensory experience and atmosphere of peace, luxury, and connection to the divine. Either way, it's clear that the ancient Egyptians saw scent as far more than just something to make the air smell nice. It was an essential part of their religious, social, and spiritual lives. So, imagine yourself surrounded. Let's take a deeper look now at how the ancient Egyptians stored and displayed their perfumes. Because, of course, in a culture that valued beauty and sacred rituals as much as the Egyptians did, presentation was key. Perfumes were not just concoctions hidden in jars, they were treasures, often housed in beautiful containers that reflected the importance of the fragrance inside. These bottles were works of art in themselves, showcasing the craftsmanship and aesthetic sensibilities of the ancient Egyptians. Perfume bottles came in all shapes and sizes, often made from materials such as glass, pottery, and precious metals like gold and silver. The artistry involved in creating these containers was as intricate as the perfumes they held. Some bottles were small, portable, and designed for personal use, while others were larger and meant for display in temples or tombs. The Egyptians paid careful attention to the design, as they believed that beauty and elegance in the external world reflected the purity and power of the spiritual world. One of the most famous types of perfume bottles from ancient Egypt were those made of faience, a type of glazed ceramic material that was popular in Egyptian jewelry and crafts. These faience bottles were often decorated with intricate designs, including hieroglyphics, animal figures, or geometric patterns. The use of faience was particularly symbolic. This blue-green material was thought to represent the Nile and the heavens, and was often associated with life, death, and rebirth. When used in perfume bottles, faience was more than just a decorative element. It was a spiritual symbol, enhancing the sacred purpose of the fragrance it contained. The lids of these perfume bottles were often just as elaborate as the containers themselves. Many perfume bottles were topped with stoppers shaped like the heads of animals, gods, or even pharaohs. These stoppers weren't just decorative, they were thought to protect the precious contents inside, keeping them pure and potent. Some historians believe that the shape of the stopper could also have symbolic meaning, offering spiritual protection to the wearer or user. For instance, a stopper shaped like the head of a lion or a falcon could symbolize strength, protection, or divine favor. Perfume bottles were often placed in tombs with the deceased, signifying the importance of scent in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that scent could provide comfort and protection to the deceased in their journey through the underworld, ensuring that they would reach the afterlife safely. Some tombs even contained special perfume bottles filled with resins and oils to help preserve the body of the deceased. showcasing the multi-layered importance of perfume in both the living and the dead's journey. But what about everyday life? How did the Egyptians store their perfumes when not in use? For the wealthy, it was common to keep perfume in special cosmetic boxes or personal cabinets in their homes. These were often intricately designed with decorative elements, such as gold leaf, precious stones, and hieroglyphic inscriptions. Many of these boxes were found in tombs, hinting that Egyptians considered their perfumes to be treasures that should be cared for and protected. Perfume wasn't something to be tucked away in a drawer. It was an art, a treasure, and a part of daily life that deserved to be celebrated. Historians still debate how much the beauty of the perfume containers influenced the Egyptians' appreciation of the fragrances themselves. Some argue that the elaborate design of the bottles reflected the Egyptians' belief in the sacredness of. As we drift further into the story of perfume in ancient Egypt, let's take a moment to consider the most famous Egyptian perfume wearers, those royal figures, who made scents an essential part of their daily lives. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, is perhaps the most famous of all. Her name is still synonymous with luxury, seduction, and, of course, perfume. The perfumes she wore were legendary, often said to be so intoxicating that they could captivate anyone who came close. But what were the secrets behind her famously alluring scents? Cleopatra didn't just wear any perfume, she wore scents designed to mesmerize and control, often incorporating exotic ingredients that were both rare and expensive. One of her favorite fragrances was made from jasmine, a flower prized for its sweet, floral scent. Jasmine was associated with love, beauty, and sensuality, and it's said that Cleopatra used it to ensure her allure, especially in her infamous meetings with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her perfumes were created to not just please the nose, but to project power, control, and divine favor. By wearing these exotic and divine scents, Cleopatra wasn't simply trying to smell nice. She was also making a statement about her authority and her connection to the gods. But Cleopatra's use of perfume wasn't just about beauty and seduction. It was a part of her grand diplomatic strategy. According to some historical accounts, she used fragrance as a way of controlling and enchanting the men in her life. One such story goes that she would have her sails soaked in perfume before arriving at the shores of Alexandria to meet her Roman suitors. As the ships approached, the air would fill with the intoxicating aroma of perfumes, setting the stage for the powerful and influential meetings that would follow. Imagine the scene: Cleopatra's ship, her sails billowing in the wind, carrying the sense of luxury and power into the harbor. With the right perfume, she could command a room, a kingdom, and the hearts of those around her. Historians still debate how much of this perfume-centered lore is based on truth versus myth. It's clear that Cleopatra understood the power of scent. Her legendary use of fragrance exemplifies the Egyptians' deep belief in the significance of perfume. It wasn't just for personal pleasure, it was a tool of influence, an extension of one's power, and a way of cultivating the perfect public image. But Cleopatra wasn't the only royal who used perfume to project power and elegance. Egyptian pharaohs and nobility used fragrance as part of their daily routines to maintain not just cleanliness, but also their divine connection. Perfume was seen as something that could protect the body and soul from harmful forces, whether in life or the afterlife. Pharaohs often had special perfumes crafted to accompany them in their tombs, ensuring that they would have the divine sense needed to reach the afterlife. For the nobility, perfume was a way to communicate status. Like Cleopatra, they used scent as a tool for enhancing their public presence. The most lavish perfumes were often crafted with rare ingredients like spikenard, cinnamon, and myrrh. These scents were so precious that they were reserved for those with enough wealth and influence to afford them. In some cases, perfume was also used as an offering to the gods, now that we've explored the powerful use of perfume by royalty. Let's take a look at how the practice of scent and perfume making spread beyond Egypt's elite circles. While the highest classes certainly had access to the most luxurious and rare perfumes, the art of perfume making wasn't something confined only to kings and queens. Perfume and scent were integral parts of daily life for people of all social classes in ancient Egypt. Even the middle and lower classes had access to simpler forms of perfume, though it was often made from more affordable ingredients. These perfumes, while not as elaborate as those created for the pharaohs, still played a significant role in personal care, hygiene, and social interactions. The average Egyptian could wear perfume made from common herbs like coriander, mint, and cedarwood, which were locally available and still carried both pleasant scents and healing properties. In fact, perfume in Egypt wasn't just about luxury, it was also an essential part of hygiene. The Egyptians, known for their meticulous cleanliness, would apply perfumes to their bodies after bathing, which was a regular ritual for many. The fragrances not only helped mask odors, but were believed to have purifying qualities. So, in a way, perfume served as an early form of deodorant, and many Egyptians considered their scent an outward expression of their personal hygiene and spiritual health. Perfume was also commonly used in other public spaces, like temples, palaces, and homes. People would burn incense during religious rituals, making the air thick with the calming and purifying scents of frankincense or myrrh. This wasn't just about creating a pleasant atmosphere. Incense was believed to have divine power, helping to connect the worshippers to the gods. The sacred nature of scent could transform an ordinary room into a temple, filling it with an aura of divine presence. As much as scent played a role in the lives of the common people, it also became a symbol of luxury that could be used for social and diplomatic purposes. Perfume, as we saw with Cleopatra, was also about showing off one's status, whether that meant flaunting access to the most expensive perfumes or simply keeping up with trends. Traders and merchants would often travel across Egypt and beyond its borders to bring back the rarest ingredients. Egyptians traveled to places like Punt, modern-day Somalia, and Ethiopia, where they could find frankincense and myrrh, which were highly prized for their use in perfumes. These rare materials didn't just end up in the royal courts. They were traded throughout Egypt, eventually making their way into the homes of the wealthy middle class as well. The perfume trade was an important part of Egypt's economy, helping to create a network of both domestic and international exchanges. Perfume makers, or perfumers, were skilled artisans who could often be found in busy markets, selling their fragrant creations to anyone who could afford them. It's likely that these perfumers had their own specialized workshops, creating unique blends for individuals, temples, and royalty. Even the poorest Egyptians could enjoy the luxury of fragrance in some form, whether it was the modest scent of local herbs or a special bottle of perfume passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether perfume's role in Egyptian society was more about personal care or if it was an essential part of the broader religious and social fabric. Some scholars suggest that perfume was used primarily as a tool for status and prestige, while others point to its deeper spiritual and therapeutic roles. Regardless of the purpose, it's clear that scent was a central part of Egyptian culture and expression of both personal hygiene and spiritual devotion. So, as you lay back, imagine the scent of herbs and flowers swirling through the air. As the ancient Egyptians went about their daily lives, each scent contributing to their sense of well-being and connection to the divine. Now that we've explored the role of perfume in everyday Egyptian life, let's take a moment to reflect on its lasting influence. The legacy of Egyptian perfume making didn't just fade away with the fall of their empire. In fact, the art of perfume creation and the use of scent spread far beyond Egypt, influencing cultures across the Mediterranean and the Near East. The Egyptians were pioneers, and their methods of extracting and blending perfumes became the foundation for perfume cultures that thrived for centuries. As perfume made its way through trade routes, it captured the attention of neighboring civilizations like the Greeks and Romans. Both of these cultures admired Egyptian perfume-making techniques and integrated them into their own beauty rituals. The Greeks, especially, were fascinated by the Egyptians' use of scent for spiritual and therapeutic purposes. Greek philosophers and physicians like Hippocrates and Galen acknowledged the healing properties of scents, borrowing from Egyptian practices and expanding on them. The use of perfume as both an art form and a method of personal care quickly became a cultural staple. Roman society, which was heavily influenced by Egyptian customs, took things a step further. Roman emperors and aristocrats would commission vast quantities of perfume, often using it in large quantities during their extravagant banquets, baths, and festivals. Roman perfume makers, many of whom were trained by Egyptian artisans, began to refine the art of scent making. They developed new techniques of distillation and blending, improving upon Egyptian methods. However, no matter how the Romans adapted and changed, Egyptian perfume culture remained the gold standard of luxury and opulence. Interestingly, while perfume spread to the West, Egypt never lost its status as a hub of perfume trade and production. Even as centuries passed, Egyptians continued to create some of the most luxurious and sought-after perfumes. Their unique blends, passed down through generations, remained a symbol of divine connection and purity. In fact, Egyptian-style perfumes continued to be used in religious ceremonies and for personal use in various cultures. The scents that once filled Egyptian temples found their way into the incense of Christian churches, the palaces of Persian kings, and the courts of Byzantine emperors. Historians still debate whether the Greeks and Romans adopted Egyptian perfume making purely out of admiration for its refinement, or whether they were also motivated by a desire to connect with the divine, just as the Egyptians had. Was the use of perfume in religious rituals a means to bring people closer to the gods, or was it just a luxury item passed from one empire to the next? Some scholars argue that the ancient Egyptians had a uniquely spiritual relationship with scent, using it to align themselves with the gods and the afterlife, while others believe the adoption of perfume by later civilizations was more about status and luxury. Either way, it's undeniable that the Egyptians laid the foundation for perfume cultures that would flourish for millennia. As you breathe in the calmness of your evening, imagine the ancient world of Egypt, with its bustling markets and sacred temples filled with rich fragrances of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus. The same scents that the Egyptians used to honor their gods and ease their daily lives are the same fragrances that eventually traveled the world. These perfumes carried not just sweet aromas, but centuries of tradition and a deep connection to the divine. They were more than just luxuries. They were a bridge between the physical world and the sacred, and they continue to influence the world of scent even today. As we move forward in our fragrant journey, please, let's shift our focus to the decline of the once flourishing art of perfume making in ancient Egypt. We've already seen how perfume was a central part of Egyptian daily life and culture. From the luxury of royal courts to the spiritual rituals of temples. But like many things in ancient civilizations, the craft of perfume making faced challenges over time. Changes in politics, the economy, and foreign invasions had significant impacts on Egyptian perfume culture. By the time of Egypt's conquest by the Romans in 30 BCE, Egyptian perfume making was already facing competition from other Mediterranean cultures, while Egypt remained a key player in the perfume trade, especially with the continued demand for its resins like myrrh and frankincense. The Greeks and Romans had begun to develop their own perfume-making methods. As the Roman Empire expanded, they introduced new techniques for perfume production, refining distillation methods and experimenting with other ingredients. Over time, this led to a shift in the perfume industry, and Egyptian perfume making was no longer the only standard of luxury. But the decline wasn't just about the rise of Roman methods. Internal struggles within Egypt also played a role in the disruption of traditional perfume production. With Egypt's political instability and changing rulers, economic and cultural shifts took a toll on various craft industries, including perfume making. The once thriving workshops of master perfumers began to dwindle, and the sacred art of scent making, which had once been passed down through generations, began to lose its prominence. The focus shifted, and perfume was no longer at the forefront of Egyptian culture in the same way it once was. Historians still argue about how much Egypt's perfume culture was truly affected by these shifts. Some suggest that the Roman influence and the evolution of perfume-making techniques led to a decline in Egyptian production, while others believe that Egypt's perfume industry was already starting to decline before the Romans arrived. Is clear, however, is that over time, Egyptian perfume making was no longer the dominant force it once had been. The art of scent had evolved and expanded, and although Egyptian fragrances remained highly valued, the empire's unique perfume culture began to fade. Yet, despite this decline, Egyptian perfume traditions never completely disappeared. While Egyptian perfume makers may have lost their position of dominance, they still influenced the perfume-making techniques of future civilizations. The use of natural oils, resins, and flowers continued to inspire perfume production in places like Greece, Rome, and beyond. Even though the golden age of Egyptian perfume culture had passed, the legacy of their perfumes continued to permeate through history, influencing the perfume industries of later cultures. So, as you rest here tonight, think about how scents can carry the weight of history. The same perfumes that once graced the courts of Cleopatra and filled the temples of Egypt are still a part of our world today, influencing modern fragrance making. These ancient scents, which once helped Egyptians relax before sleep, connect with the divine and celebrate life, continue to be a part of our rituals, proving that the art of scent truly has a timeless nature, surviving through centuries of change. Now that we've witnessed the rise and eventual decline of Egyptian perfume making, let's turn our attention to how this ancient practice continues to influence the world today. The Egyptian mastery of fragrance, their unique blends of resins, oils, and flowers, laid the foundation for the global perfume industry we know now. Although the peak of Egyptian perfume making passed centuries ago, its techniques and cultural significance have not only survived, but continue to inspire modern perfume. The legacy of ancient, key Egyptian perfumes can be seen in many ways. First, There is the continued use of myrrh and frankincense in modern fragrance. These two resins, which were so deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture for their spiritual and medicinal properties, still appear in contemporary perfumes today. Myrrh, with its warm, resinous scent, and frankincense, with its smoky, rich aroma, are often used in both traditional and modern fragrance compositions to evoke a sense of mystery, spirituality, and depth. In fact, these ingredients have become staples in the perfume industry, showing how ancient practices are carried forward in the scents that surround us. But it's not just about the ingredients themselves. The concept of fragrance as a tool for spiritual connection is something that has lived on. Much like the ancient Egyptians used perfume to elevate their rituals and bring them closer to the divine, many modern cultures continue to use scent for similar purposes. For example, in religious ceremonies or meditative practices, incense and aromatic oils are still burned to create a sacred atmosphere. The very act of lighting incense to create a calming environment, whether for prayer, meditation, or simply relaxation, echoes the Egyptian practice of filling their temples with sacred fragrances to honor the gods. Historians still debate how much of the use of incense and perfume today can be directly attributed to Egyptian influence. Some scholars suggest that many perfume traditions from other ancient civilizations, such as the Greeks and Romans, were inspired by Egyptian methods, while others believe that these practices evolved independently in different regions, regardless of the origins. It's clear that the fundamental connection between scent and spirituality that the Egyptians cultivated has persisted, influencing religious and spiritual practices around the world. Perfume in the modern world has also become a luxury item, much as it was in ancient Egypt. High-end perfume brands continue to draw from Egyptian-inspired ingredients and use the concept of perfume as a symbol of status, beauty, and elegance. Just as Cleopatra used her intoxicating fragrances to capture the attention of powerful men, modern celebrities and influencers use perfume as part of their public image, selling not just a scent, but an entire lifestyle of luxury. The idea that fragrance can elevate one's social standing is as relevant today as it was in the courts of ancient Egypt, of course. In the modern world, we have far more advanced methods of creating and distributing perfume. The Egyptians relied on basic distillation and pressing techniques. Perfumers use cutting-edge technology to extract and combine scents. However, even with all of our modern advancements, the essence of what the Egyptians created remains. The same perfume is about more than just fragrance. It's about creating an experience, a connection, a mood, whether for spiritual or social reasons. Scent is still a bridge to something greater than ourselves, just as it was for the ancient Egyptians. So, as you rest this evening, imagine the incredible journey these ancient fragrances have taken through time, from the sacred temples of Egypt to the luxurious perfume counters of today. The connection between fragrance and the human experience has endured, continuing to evoke memories, emotions, and even transcendence. The Egyptians believed in the power of scent to connect the physical and spiritual realms, and now, thousands of years later, so do we. As we come to the final section of our fragrant journey through ancient Egypt, let's pause and reflect on the central role that perfume played in the lives of the Egyptians. We've traveled through time, witnessing how this ancient practice of mixing oils, resins, flowers, and herbs into perfumes was not just a luxury, but a vital part of the Egyptian spiritual, social, and personal lives. From Cleopatra's legendary use of perfume to the daily rituals of the common people, Scent was never just something they wore, it was something they lived by. But beyond just the physical experience of wearing or burning perfumes, there was a deeper, more symbolic connection to the act of scenting oneself. For the Egyptians, perfume was closely tied to order, purity, and balance, concepts that were essential in their understanding of the universe. The right fragrance, properly used, was believed to maintain harmony between the body, the soul, and the gods. Whether used for sleep, for beauty, or as a spiritual offering, perfume was seen as a tool for aligning the self with the divine order of the cosmos. Perfume also played a crucial role in the concept of immortality, perhaps most notably in the context of the afterlife. Just as they carefully preserved the bodies of the dead with the finest resins and oils, the Egyptians believed that scent, peculiarly those of myrrh and frankincense, would guide the soul safely to the next world. Perfumes were often placed in tombs to accompany the deceased on their journey, ensuring that they would be protected from evil spirits and be welcomed by the gods. The connection between life, death, and the divine was inseparable from the fragrances they cherished. As you settle in for sleep tonight, think about how the same role perfume played in ancient Egyptian rituals can still resonate today. Modern perfumers who carefully blend oils, florals, and resins are still capturing the magic of scent, the same magic that the Egyptians discovered millennia ago. In a way, each time you wear your favorite fragrance or light a candle, you're participating in a long-standing tradition, one that has crossed centuries and civilizations. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to realize that scent is more than just a pleasant smell. It is a vehicle for memory, for connection, and for spirituality. Perfume, for them, was as much a journey as it was a product. The fragrances used by the Egyptians were designed not just to smell good, but to create an experience, to transport the wearer into a different state of mind, to connect them with the divine, and to help them maintain spiritual and physical balance. The calming scents that you imagined filling the air tonight, the frankincense, the jasmine, the lotus wood, have been used by the ancient Egyptians to create an atmosphere of peace and relaxation. Just as they helped prepare for sleep, protect from evil, and offer prayers to the gods. In the end, the ancient Egyptians didn't just perfume their bodies, they perfumed their lives. From the moment they woke up to the moment they drifted into sleep, scent was a constant companion, an invisible presence that helped them maintain balance, harmony, and connection to the divine. As you rest now, remember the timeless tradition of using scent not just as a luxury, but as a way of creating peace, connection, and balance in your own life. Let the fragrant memories of ancient Egypt be your guide to a peaceful night's rest, as you too drift into a sacred, serene sleep.